Good. All right. So it's Lieutenant Christopher Cook, Arlington PD. So I'm going to brief out on our incident from yesterday. And while we start that, I want to kind of talk about the day before first. So on Friday evening, around 7 p.m., we responded to a report involving a member of that family that lived there on the street at Thomas Chapel address. Part of that investigation, we actually responded to Cook's Children's Hospital regarding a report. On our way to the hospital, officers received information from the original person that called us saying that the suspect of that particular case had sent out some text messages indicating that he wanted to harm himself, specifically kill himself. So we sent additional officers to the Thomas Chapel address on Friday evening. They get on scene around 7:20 that evening, and based upon the comments that were made, the suspect did exit the house, was compliant, talked to officers. We took him into custody on a mental health evaluation. Typically refer to those as a NED, and what happens is the officers will transport them to a mental health facility. In this particular case, the suspect went to John Peter Smith Hospital. At some point that night, I don't know the exact time, he was released from the hospital and made his way back to the Thomas Chapel address. Unbeknownst to the officers, we were conducting a separate investigation that ended up being an invasive recording of a minor child. And because of the age of the child and the circumstances, we cannot go into the specific case details, only to say that that case is still pending at that point. So fast forward to last night. Around 6:30 p.m., we received an assault in progress case. It's a felony assault. The caller stated that the victim, an adult male, was assaulted in the front yard with a baseball bat. Officers arrive on scene and determine that the suspect, later identified as 31-year-old Nicholas Walker, was the actual suspect that committed the offense. He had retreated into the residence prior to our arrival, and at that point we believed he was really the only one inside the house. He refused to come out and speak to officers. The victim had injuries to his arm and head, which included swelling from the baseball bat. Officers determined that there was probable cause to arrest Mr. Walker for a felony aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Again, we continued to try to negotiate with him, to speak to him. We were trying to initiate phone contact. We did have some phone contact with the suspect. This went on and off for about the better part of an hour or so. We also used our public address system, which is just a loud PA system on our patrol cars, to try to negotiate with a surrender and have him come outside. Unfortunately, he did not come outside at that point, and so again, we tried to wait him out. At this point, we had an emergency arrest team, and let me explain kind of what that is. It's usually a group of officers where they have specific tasks. If Mr. Walker was going to come outside, their role was to take him into custody for the aggravated assault. They were positioned near the front of the residence by the driveway where the garage is located. About an hour and a half into this call, they heard a noise. It sounded like the front door was opening, and so they went around the corner and could see Mr. Walker exiting onto the front walkway. At that point, officers gave loud verbal commands, as you'll see from the video footage that we're releasing, and for him to get his hands up. The suspect pulled what officers believed to be a handgun from the front of his waistband, took a shooting stance, and pointed the gun at the officers. 3 officers discharged their duty weapons, striking the suspect. Mr. Walker was pronounced deceased at the scene. Later, after the crime scene began to be processed, we determined that the gun was an actual BB gun, or as we refer to them as it's a replica firearm. We'll release a photo of that as well, and when you see it, it looks just like a real Beretta 92 model handgun. It's unfortunate that we continue to have these conversations. As you know, back in November 2017, we had an incident at our local mall where a suspect brandished and pointed a BB gun at an officer, and we had a deadly force encounter at that location as well. We've talked about this publicly through our social media. The risk associated with BB guns, CO2 guns, pellet guns. We know we have seized these types of weapons off people that are doing harm to our community, engaging in robberies and other criminal acts, and so we continue to have this conversation. Again, there's no training in the world that an officer would have been able to readily distinguish that that was a BB gun versus a gun, and so that's what you'll see. At that point, I'll open it up to a few questions, but know that we'll release the 3 portions of the body-worn camera footage from the officers, and we'll release a dash camera footage patrol car that actually captured the incident as the way the car was parked towards the front of the house.
What can you tell us about the 3 officers involved, how many years they've been with you guys?
Yeah, I don't know the exact tenure. 2 of the officers were assigned to the East Patrol District, and 1 officer was assigned to the North Patrol District. I don't know their exact tenure.
But all 3 of them fired their weapons?
Yes, well, all 3 of them fired their weapons.
Chris, why release this video so quickly? What's the purpose?
Yeah, so, we always receive community questions anytime there's a deadly force encounter in our community, and we know that, they're rightly so. There's going to be, just people wondering what happened, what transpired in this case. This is a very, it's just a hard case to have to deal with. When officers come to work, they know that inherently there are certain risks with our profession. But at the end of the day, no one thinks they're going to be involved in a deadly force incident either. It's unfortunate that Mr. Walker came outside and forced a confrontation. We don't have enough facts to say this was a traditional suicide by cop, but that's one angle that we're actually looking at, just based upon the previous day, him making the comments on text that he wanted to die and that he was suicidal. And then fast forward to the next day where he has this confrontation with this other adult male.
Honestly, I don't know what the protocol is for you guys and legally what y'all are able and not able to do once y'all hand people over to a hospital. I guess people would probably want to know, why was he released? Was he able to release himself from the hospital? I mean, how does that even work,
Yeah, so when officers transport an individual to the hospital, there's different ways to do that, but in this particular case, officers prepare a document, and it's based upon the facts that they knew at the time, where these text messages had been received by another family member saying he was suicidal. And so at that point, the mental health provider, in this particular case was John Peter Smith Hospital, they have professionals that evaluate that, and they make certain determinations. We'll have to figure out why he was released and why he was released that night. A lot of times it'll be a 3-day hold. It just really depends. We also will try to determine if there was a notification that occurred. From the preliminary facts that we have, the Arlington Police Department was not notified of his pending release. And oftentimes in high-risk situations, obviously we'd want to be notified in certain circumstances. And so that's a deep dive that we'll be doing to determine what exactly happened.
Was that a violation of protocol that the department has with an understanding of these hospitals that take these cases?
No, I think it's too early to determine that. I think at this point, it's still a very fresh case. We're only about 24 hours into the incident, and so we'll be having those conversations to figure out exactly. We work with MHMR. We actually have people that liaison in our organization, and we also have a unit that manages a lot of these cases to help us track kind of what our historical experience is when we're dealing with. It's no secret that, unfortunately, in today's society, we deal with a lot of mental health issues from time to time. And it's not only here in Arlington, but you can see from across the country. This is a phenomenon that we've been dealing with for years. It's something that our chief has talked about passionately, about that it's not just a police issue having to respond to these types of calls. It takes, really, there's a lot of accountability across not only the mental health community, but other providers to help us make sure that people get the treatment that they need so that they are productive members of society, if you will.
But there is a protocol that the hospitals do follow.
Certainly, when we drop a individual off for evaluation, they do have certain protocol and criteria that they evaluate when making determinations on what kind of treatment plan, or if the person will be staying at their facility, or whether or not they're released, how they're released, who they're released to. Yeah, there's a lot of those protocols.
And you get the call when they are being released?
Not in every case, no, not at all. And so in certain high-risk cases, there is a liaison that will liaison with our units. In the preliminary facts that we have right now, that did not occur. And so we'll look at why that didn't occur and go forward from there.
So you were there, just to be clear, you guys went there to investigate the invasive visual recording of a minor child. In the meantime, the suspect appeared to be suicidal. You guys took him to JPS. JPS released him. The very next time he was allegedly beating somebody with a baseball bat in his front yard. And then inside and then came back out with a gun, or with a BB gun.
Yeah, so the trajectory of all of that is we responded to the hospital for the initial call. While officers were en route, we received information that he may be at the Thomas Chapel address and is suicidal based upon the nature of the call that we were investigating. And so we had officers go to both locations.
Friday.
Yes, this was on Friday. The invasive video recording still remains under investigation. We did not effect an arrest. We transported him to the mental health facility.
That sounds like child pornography. I mean, are you able to go that far?
Yeah, I can't go that far at this point, just based upon, we have to be very careful. Number one, we don't want to identify the victim in this particular case, and so we're kind of bound by certain rules that we won't be able to discuss the contents of that case yet.
So he was already at the hospital?
No, he was not at the hospital. The initial complainant that called us to make this report, they were at the hospital with the victim.
Oh, with the victim, okay.
Yes.
And at this point, Chris, can you say, does this department feel like the shooting was justified?
Absolutely. It's really difficult to be put in a situation where someone comes out, takes a shooting stance, you're giving them loud verbal commands, you've been trying to negotiate with them, and they produce what we classify as a firearm. Yeah.
Were there officers with special mental health training called to the scene at the second call regarding the suspect?
All officers are trained in mental health first aid. That's a priority not only for our department, for the profession as a whole, because a lot of calls that we respond to on a routine basis have some type of mental health component.
But aren't there officers that receive additional or special training in mental health or
Yes, we do.
mental health professionals?
We have correct. We do have officers that have mental health peace officer proficiencies, as they're called. But all officers go through crisis intervention training, and we continue with that shift and focus in our training efforts because, unfortunately, again, we respond to these types of calls on a pretty frequent basis where someone is in need of some type of mental health assistance.
So I'm wondering if the officers with additional or special training were there at the scene at the shooting.
I'm not going to release the officers' names, and so I'd have to do a deep dive on what each officer, what their specialty was or what their certification was. I will tell you that all officers are trained on how to de-escalation tactics, how to diffuse a situation, and quite frankly, that's what was occurring during this call. For an hour and a half, we attempted to make contact with him. We did make some contact with him, but for whatever reason, he dictated the outcome that occurred by refusing to come out initially, to be taken into custody, and then when he came out, he withdrew this replica firearm from his waistband that we know now was a BB gun.
Chris, you say that often in cases like this, you get, community, people who want to see the video right away or have concerns about what happened. Have you gotten those already? Have people been calling your office already demanding to see that video?
We've seen some social media posts, and that's pretty regular. When you have a use of force incident that involves deadly force, you'll see people want that. If you notice, Arlington PD has really been in the forefront over the last couple of years trying to be as transparent as possible. We know the request or the thirst for information is enormous in the first few hours of an incident that involves deadly force. And so in that regard, we try to move very hastily, but with also for a strong regard for the facts of the case. And so that's why we're making this video available. If you notice in our previous shootings as well, we typically try to release that very quickly at the onset of the investigation. My transition? Okay. It's really sad to have to report out on these next two cases. We hear of child cases involving firearms. We do a lot of community efforts to talk about securing firearms, making sure that they're inaccessible to children, because quite frankly, guns and kids, they do not mix. Kids are curious. Kids will inherently try to pick up a firearm, and it can lead to really deadly consequences. Today, we've responded to two separate incidents involving children that suffered gunshot wounds. In the first shooting, we responded around 12 noon to an apartment complex in the 3800 block of Mahonia Way. The caller reported that their daughter had been shot by accident. When we got there, there was an 8-year-old girl. She had an injury to her buttocks. She was transported to Cook's Children's Hospital. Thankfully, she will survive. She will be okay. She's been admitted. She's not been released yet. Initially, the story that we received was not factual from family members at the scene. It was reported that the adolescent was shot outside of the apartment. We know that not to be the truth. As we examined the scene, there was a bullet hole that we located inside the apartment. We also located a firearm with a spent shell casing. We believe so that based upon the evidence at the scene that the shooting did take place inside. What we know right now is that there was at least 2 young girls, the 8-year-old that was shot, another girl, I don't know her age, and an older teen that was inside a room when we believe the shooting took place. The firearm that we recovered is being described as an Uzi or MAC-10 style 9mm firearm. That firearm's been reported stolen out of Bastrop, Texas. I don't have the details whether that was a burglary of a vehicle or a house. We'll be looking into that. We'll be contacting that police agency to get more facts. Right now, our gun crimes unit is trying to kind of figure out what exactly happened. The story is that the child sat on the firearm and it went off. And so we have a lot more unanswered questions than we're able to provide the facts tonight. But thankfully, again, in that particular case, the child is going to be okay. We're working with investigators really to piece together the timeline and exactly how the child was shot. In the second incident, about 4.5 hours later at 4:30, we responded to the 1400 block of Clone. Officers found a 6-year-old boy who had a gunshot wound to the head. That child was initially transported to Mansfield Methodist, but he subsequently was flown by air ambulance to Cook's Children, being told he's in very grave condition tonight. There were several kids, we believe, and adults in the home when the shooting took place. However, we're not sure if the adults were in the room where the shooting actually took place. We believe that a 10 or 11-year-old sibling, specifically a brother of the 6-year-old, accessed a rifle that was in the home. The parents are not sure how the rifle, they're not claiming the rifle. They didn't realize the gun was in the home, and this sibling pointed it at the victim and pulled the trigger, and that's how the child was shot. We have recovered that rifle at the scene. Crime scene is still on scene at this hour of the night. And again, it's just these are hard calls for first responders to have to deal with, not only police but fire, EMS. And so our hearts go out, and we pray for the recovery of this child. But unfortunately, it just doesn't. It's a tough call to have to work. And so we don't have any arrest at this point in either of the cases. These cases will take some time to figure out, but there is active criminal investigations in both of these.
First, what type of rifle? Like, we're talking a shotgun rifle, or?
I think it's I was described as a 22 caliber rifle, and right now another sibling in the home claims that he purchased it. This sibling is a teenager, so first of all, I don't know how a teenager buys a rifle, but that's the story that we have at this point. So we'll be tracking down, seeing if we can backtrace with ATF and our gun crimes unit where this rifle originated from, who it belonged to. But yeah, it's just described as a 22 long rifle.
And the parents didn't know in this particular case that the gun was even in the house. How old is this sibling who bought it?
A older teenager, I don't know his exact age, and the young child that discharged the firearm is either 10 or 11.
Do we know yet, Chris, if, and I'm sorry if you said it, if parents were home in one or both of the cases?
Yes, so we believe parents were in both, were in the apartment and the residence in both cases. We don't believe at this time that the parents in the second incident were in the same room where the shooting took place. Sounds as if there were just a bunch of kids doing what kids do. They were playing video games, and for whatever reason, this other child accessed the rifle, points it at the victim, and pulls the trigger. Unfortunately, the victim was struck. There was also another sibling, a 6 or 7-year-old daughter, or I guess you could say sister, that was struck with shrapnel. She's expected to be okay.
Which case was this?
This is the second case I was talking about at the private residence at 1400 block of Clone.
Did it happen in the garage of the second incident? Did it happen in the garage at all? Because we saw investigators taking pictures in the garage.
I don't have that information. I was told initially it was inside the house, so I'm not sure.
And so she was hit by shrapnel. Okay.
Um,
This is, I'm sorry, stolen at a Bastrop, and then the second one where this teenager was able to buy a gun. How would you describe that? Because it's not something you hear every day.
Yeah, it's shocking. You know, we do a lot of public education initiatives on the dangers of firearms. We are in a huge debate right now at the state level. As you know, the governor put out some executive orders last week. And so gun violence is really, it has no place really in our society. And so I think we're all wrestling with the fact on how to deal with it. But when you hear stories like this, it just shocks your conscience. How can a child access these types of firearms? A stolen firearm in one case, and in this case, a rifle allegedly purchased. And we don't know if that's going to bear out to be the truth on how the older person accessed the firearm, but that's just the story that we're getting. But yeah, it's shocking to us. You know, our first responders, you know, when we get on a call like that, number one, we've got to make sure the situation's safe, but we want to, I heard the radio traffic of the first officers there who were screaming for EMS to get there as fast as they could, because as any first responder, your heart goes out. You have a child that's shot in the head, and so it's tough.
And how would you describe an Uzi? What is that?
It is it's kind of got a handgun style look, but it has a long magazine well. So it's a 9mm. It's being described as an Uzi / MAC-10, and I can show you some photos afterwards.
And I've seen those in movies, you know, like I've never heard of actually someone having, I mean, they're legal, right? They're legal to have.
So it depends. I will double check all of that information. It kind of depends on, number one, is someone allowed to possess the firearm, meaning that they're not a felon. But it is not legal for a child to possess those types of guns, obviously. And as far as, so we'll have to examine the gun to see exactly if it was legally possessed or not.
Can you say if in the second incident, if either the victim or the sibling who shot him, are we talking about anybody who's special needs? Can you say?
I have heard that comment made, and so that's something that investigators will look at as we conduct the criminal investigation.
The shooter?
Yes, we'll determine. I mean, if that is a fact that there is a special needs child involved, that's something that is that we confer with the district attorney's office. We also are trying to determine, was it accidental? You know, was it intentional? It's just so early. We're just a few hours into this. We just don't have those answers. Right now, we just pray that the 6-year-old pulls out of it and survives the injury. It's just a grave outlook right now.
But just to be clear, just so we're clear.
Sure.
Y'all are going to look into whether the special needs child, the older child shot his little brother, right? Not the little brother being the special needs.
Absolutely, yes. We're looking into the fact whether or not that was a special needs child, the shooter. The 10 or 11-year-old, correct.
In the case with the girl who was shot with the stolen Uzi, the story that she sat on it, of course, what are the other options that you guys are looking at as possibilities for how that happened?
We're looking at the possibility where the kid's playing with the gun. Was there a third older teenager in the location when we got there? There was not. Somebody we believe that was in the residence or in the apartment at the time of the shooting was not on scene for us to interview. And so that obviously we're going to look at trying to identify who that was, what their story is. And then definitely we're going to get a forensic interview with the child victim at some point. She's been through a lot. She was in a lot of pain, even though she's going to be okay. Obviously, you know, the gunshot wound was very painful for her, and so at some point that we'll get a forensic interview with her to try to gather some more facts as to what happened.
And there were 2 people in the house with her, you said, two other girls and then parents.
Well, it was the victim, another girl, and then another teenage boy, we believe, an older teen boy that we're going to have to track down and interview.
We imagine CPS was on scene for all of these?
I know in the first case, we do partner with the Child Protective Services, and so they did make the scene. I don't know what the outcome is, and surely, I'm sure on the second one that would occur too.
And you call the ATF in to help? Are they there tonight by any chance?
So I don't know who's on the scene, but I will tell you the ATF houses out of Arlington PD with our new Gun Crimes Task Force, and so we work side by side. They actually office upstairs, and so we have access to all of their databases, their crime computer equipment, stuff like that.
The teenage sibling who bought the other gun, that was a boy?
Yeah, the story is that an older teenage boy had purchased this rifle on the street. Again, at, you know, I don't know if that's going to bear truth or not, but that's kind of, you know, what we're looking at. The parents, again, I'm sure they're devastated. And so at the end of the day, we'll try to determine if they knew it was in there or not. Right now, we don't believe the parents knew that the gun was there, and only one parent was in the home at the time.
And in the first case, you're not exactly sure, obviously, how the gun made it there. So we don't know if it's I mean, the child had access to it, obviously, but we don't know who brought it into the house or whatever.
Yeah, we'll look at that report in Bastrop to see exactly how it was reported stolen, and then that might shed some light on how it ended up in Arlington, Texas, and in this apartment.
Do you happen to know when it was reported stolen?
I don't have those dates. We can get that to you, though.
How often are you finding gun violence in this city as a result of weapons used that are stolen? How big of an issue is
Yeah,
stolen guns?
you know, you always deal with stolen guns. This is why, you know, we recommend people have to secure their belongings. A lot of guns, believe it or not, are stolen out of cars. People go to restaurants, they leave their firearms in their vehicles, or whatever the case may be. And so I'd have to look at the specific data, but it is a recurring issue not only for Arlington but all of North Texas, where, you know, we try to prevent guns from getting in the hands of wrong people. You know, law-abiding citizens are one thing, but when the criminal element accesses these firearms and use it for nefarious means, then we run into situations like this, where, you know, a child can stumble upon it or whatever the case may be.
In the second incident, did y'all find a second, like a handgun, that was also unsecured?
I don't believe so. It was only offered to me that they believe a rifle was used in the injury to the child, and that was found in a car after the fact. So it's possible someone tried to remove the rifle from the house prior to our arrival.
It was found in a car.
Yeah, it was found in a car on the street. Anything else?
And that was in the, I'm sorry, that was in the second.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.